There were 4 of us the last summer we went. Me, my 2 cousins from Michigan, and Miles, the youngest. Granddad called it Camp Harold because it sounded more cheerful than just staying with an old man in a cabin with no reception. He'd built it himself in the 70s, half logs, hand-dug outhouse, rain barrel for showers. It sat on a clearing 10 minutes from the dirt road, with nothing around but trees and the kind of silence that absorbs everything. It was a tradition, every July, between school ending and whatever vacations our parents had planned. The 4 of us spent a week with him in the woods. No TV, no phones, no schedules. We cooked over fire, whittled sticks, played games that didn't need boards or batteries. Granddad had a way of making it feel like an adventure instead of a punishment. He had rules. No wandering at night, no entering the shed, and no going near the clearing behind the North Ridge. That one wasn't explained. He just said the ground was unstable and left it at that. That last summer, I was 16, old enough to notice things the younger ones didn't. Miles was 10, still eager to impress. Granddad liked him best, said he had real curiosity. The other 2, Caleb and Jenny, were both around my age. We mostly stuck together, left the kid stuff to Miles. The days ran together, chopping wood, boiling rice, catching frogs. Granddad showed Miles how to skin a fish using the back of a knife. He said things like, "You only respect life when you've seen it stop." I remember Jenny giving me a look after that, like she wasn't sure if he was joking. The shed was always padlocked. Miles asked what was inside once. Granddad said, "Old tools and older mistakes," then changed the subject. At night, he'd smoke by the fire and tell stories about living through blackouts and floods. When he ran out of stories, he just stared at the flames and tapped his thumb against his knee. Midweek, I woke up to a sound like a tarp snapping. I sat up in the cabin and listened. Nothing moved. I checked to make sure Miles was still in his bunk. He was gone. I slipped on my shoes and went outside. The trees around the clearing were still. I walked past the cooking pit and saw a shadow move near the shed. A flashlight clicked off. By the time I got there, no one was around. I brought it up the next morning. Granddad said Miles had just gone to pee, but Miles didn't deny it. He just shrugged and looked at his cereal. Later that day, Jenny pulled me aside behind the water barrel. She said Miles had dirt under his fingernails and a bruise on his forearm. He wouldn't say how he got it. Caleb thought he was trying to act tough. Jenny thought it was something else. That afternoon, Granddad took Miles on a tracking walk, just the 2 of them. They came back around sunset. Miles looked pale and wouldn't talk during dinner. On Friday, the last full day, we packed early. It was tradition to clean the cabin and then hike to the lake. Miles said he didn't want to go. He stayed behind while the rest of us swam. Granddad didn't push it. He said some kids got tired of pretending nature was fun. When we came back, Miles was sitting on the cabin steps, arms wrapped around his knees. He looked up and said he wanted to sleep in the van that night. Granddad laughed it off, told him he could if he really wanted. That evening, Miles stayed silent through marshmallows and ghost stories. When we went to bed, he waited until the others were asleep and came to my bunk. He didn't whisper. He just sat down at the foot of the bed and stared at the floor. He doesn't just hunt animals, he said. He hurts them. He makes me help. I asked what he meant. He catches them alive. Rabbits, squirrels. One time, a raccoon. He puts them in that pit behind the ridge. Then he waits a few days, goes back when they're weak. Sometimes they're not dead yet. He kept talking, described how Granddad pinned one down once and handed Miles a stick, told him to hit it until it stopped moving, said it was part of growing up. He says, "It teaches me what's real." I didn't know what to say. I believed him. I didn't want to, but I did. The next morning we left early. Granddad drove us back to the meetup point where our parents were waiting with snacks and backpacks. Miles barely said goodbye. Back home, I didn't tell anyone. Neither did Jenny or Caleb. I waited for Miles to say something first. He didn't. Weeks passed. School started. Fall came and went. Granddad sent his usual birthday cards, each with a $20 bill inside. In January, Miles ran away from home. They found him a few towns over, sleeping behind a service station. When the police asked why he left, he said he didn't want to go back to Camp Harold. That was the first time his parents heard anything about it. A therapist got involved, then a social worker, then the police. I was interviewed that spring. I told them what Miles told me. They took it seriously enough to investigate. A deputy visited the cabin, took pictures, dug up part of the ridge. They didn't find any human remains, just bones, animal bones. Dozens of them. Small ones, mostly. Some still had collars. They called it disturbing but not illegal. Granddad wasn't charged with anything. When asked, he said he'd grown up in a different time. Said kids used to learn from the land, and that Miles was a sensitive boy, too modern to understand. The camp stopped after that. The next summer, the cabin stayed empty. Granddad moved into a retirement community 3 counties away. None of us visited. Years later, I drove past the turnoff to that dirt road. The sign for Camp Harold had rotted and fallen. The woods looked the same, flat, still, endless. I don't know what happened to all those animals. I don't know what Granddad told himself, but I remember what Miles said before we left. He said if I ever told anyone, I'd end up like them. My grandfather's house was built low to the ground, a brick rectangle with no basement and barely any attic. The crawl space ran the full length beneath it, sealed by a rusted metal hatch at the side of the house. As a kid, I was told never to touch it. He repeated the warning often without raising his voice. "Leave it be," he'd say, if I even glanced at it too long. Once I asked why. He was slicing an apple and didn't look up. Just leave it. I respected that rule for years. It was easy. The hatch was ugly, its bolts corroded, and the house itself always had something more interesting to offer. His collection of old cameras, the giant radio in the den, the drawer full of loose keys. He wasn't affectionate, but he wasn't cruel either. He just liked things a certain way, and he liked being left alone. After he died, the property sat untouched for months. My mother didn't want it. She said the upkeep was too much, and the taxes weren't worth it. So I volunteered to clean it out. She gave me the keys in a Ziploc bag and told me to throw away anything that smelled like mothballs. I drove up on a Friday, alone. The neighborhood was quiet, just a few retirees mowing their lawns and kids biking in lazy circles. The house hadn't changed. The blinds were still drawn. The porch light still burned out. It felt like the kind of place where time got stuck. Inside, everything was dry and stale. Nothing had been moved. His coat still hung on the hook by the door. In the kitchen, I found a plate with a fork left on it. The crust of something hardened to the edge. He died in his sleep, no warning, no collapse. Just didn't get up one morning. The coroner said it was peaceful. I spent the first few hours gathering what I could. Photographs, utility bills, broken radios, expired medication. The crawlspace didn't cross my mind until I ran out of things to do. The garage was empty. The closets were bare. The fridge was unplugged. I passed by the hatch outside as the sun started to dip. The metal looked the same, worn, sealed with a padlock that no longer held tension. It clicked open when I tugged on it. The chain fell loose. Inside was nothing but dark. I went to the shed for a flashlight and found one, wrapped in a plastic bag beneath the workbench. The batteries still worked. I had to lie flat to slide inside. The space was maybe 3 feet high, the floor made of dirt and flattened rock. It smelled like mildew and copper. The beam from the flashlight moved across dusty pipes and exposed beams. Nothing unusual at first glance. I shuffled forward a few feet. Cobwebs brushed against my arms. I scanned the walls for anything unusual. Wiring, pests, mold. The air was still, quiet. After a few minutes, I reached a corner where the wood sloped slightly and something pale stood out against the dirt. It was a cardboard box, no writing, no tape, just folded shut. I pulled it toward me, brushing off the dirt. The bottom sagged from dampness, but it held together. Inside were 2 items wrapped in cloth napkins. Both were heavy and rigid. I unwrapped the first one. It was a set of dentures, large, yellowed, a chip on the left canine. The second one looked almost identical, but smaller. One tooth was gold. I sat there, staring at them, not sure what to do. My grandfather had dentures, but these didn't look familiar. His were always spotless. He kept them in a glass next to the bathroom sink. He'd joked once that they were the only things in the house he cleaned regularly. These weren't his. I looked around the crawl space. Nothing else. No containers, no bones, no clothing. Just the box and the dirt. But something about the way the dentures were packed, deliberate, clean, made me hesitate. I rewrapped them and backed out slowly. Inside the house, I washed my hands 3 times. The water came out brown at first, then cleared. I didn't call anyone. I didn't know what to say. I left the box on the counter and tried to focus on the task I'd come for. Cleaning, sorting. That night, I slept in the guest room with the door locked. In the morning, I opened every cabinet again. I went through every drawer, lifted every rug. I found nothing else unusual. No names, no photos, no old ID cards. Just the dentures in the box, still resting on the counter, looking out of place in a house that was otherwise full of receipts and dust. I checked the bathroom. His dentures were still there, in their cup, a different shape entirely. When I brought the box to the garage, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A square of concrete near the back wall, with a hairline crack running across the center. The rest of the floor was smooth. This patch looked newer, like it had been poured years after the rest. I didn't try to break it. I just looked at it for a long time. Then I placed the box in a trash bag and put it in my trunk. I didn't tell my mother about it when I returned the keys. I didn't tell my friends either. The dentures ended up in a public dumpster 3 towns over. I didn't leave them in the house. I didn't keep them. Weeks later, I received a letter addressed to my grandfather from a return address in a state he'd never lived in. No name. Just a street. Inside was a single sheet of paper with nothing but a number written on it. That was all. I don't remember what I did with the letter. Probably threw it out with the rest of the junk. But sometimes I try to recall the number, and part of me thinks it matched the year etched into the gold tooth. I visited the property again before it sold. The new owners added shutters and painted the bricks. The crawlspace hatch had been removed entirely and replaced with a slab of concrete. There's no record of anything buried there, no police file, no missing persons match, nothing in the obituaries. But I can't stop thinking about the box, how clean it was, how carefully packed, as if someone had meant for it to stay hidden, not buried or discarded, just stored. And how sure my grandfather had been that I should never look. After our grandmother died, we were left with the job of clearing out the house. No one wanted to do it alone. The place had been sitting untouched for over a year, and the dust made it feel older than it was. My cousin Garrett and I volunteered to handle it over a weekend. The house sat on a long, sloped road that didn't have sidewalks, just patchy grass and shallow ditches full of gravel. Her mailbox still had masking tape over the last name. We let ourselves in with the key my uncle mailed from out of state. The smell was the same as I remembered: mothballs, plastic, and something stale underneath. Garrett hadn't been there in over a decade. He stood in the living room for a while, looking around like the furniture had grown new shapes. I started bagging old magazines while he stared at the carpet pattern. She never liked visitors. The curtains had been drawn so long, the windows left a clean square when we pulled them open. The air felt locked in place. The attic was always her space. She used it for storage, crafts, sewing, and things she didn't want anyone else touching. I'd only been up there once as a kid. I remembered narrow steps and exposed nails. Garrett said he didn't even know there was an attic. The door to it was behind the laundry room, hidden behind a rack of folded chairs. The bulb on the stairs was dead, so we used our phones for light. The boards groaned, but held. Near the back wall, under a slanted beam, stood a cabinet I didn't remember. It was tall and narrow, painted green with a brass latch. On the front, someone had taped a label, "Toys." The handwriting looked old, not careful, not rushed, just uneven. The latch wasn't locked, just sealed with a loop of string, like a reminder. I pulled it loose and opened the door. Inside were rows of boxes, all wrapped in the kind of brown paper used for mailing. Each was labeled in thick marker. Dates, sometimes names. Some were just numbers. Garrett pulled one down. The paper tore a little at the corner. Inside were small items in Ziploc bags. One bag held a bird figurine, wooden, detailed, carved with precision. Another had a bundle of fur, flattened and matted. Another was just teeth. He set it down and backed away. That's not right. I took out a box from the bottom shelf. It was heavier. The paper had softened with age and tore as I pulled it open. Inside was a child's lunchbox, rusted at the hinges. When I unlatched it, something rattled. The lining had been replaced with plastic. Inside were 3 rolls of film, undeveloped. Taped to the lid was a list of dates. Most were from the early 90s. One was circled. Garrett sat on a stool and ran his hands through his hair. "I need to tell you something," he said. "It's about Granddad. Our grandfather died when we were both still in school. Neither of us knew him well. He used to sit in the garage for hours, listening to old radio shows and drinking instant coffee." Garrett kept his eyes on the floor while he spoke. He said that when he was about 7, he used to stay with our grandparents for a few weeks each summer. One day, Granddad asked if he wanted to help feed the cats behind the shed. Garrett followed, thinking they were strays. Behind the shed was a makeshift pen. wire fencing around a trench. Inside were animals. Not just cats, squirrels, rabbits, a few pigeons. Some alive, some not. Garrett said Granddad told him they were sick, and he was trying to cure them. He said it like it was a project, a learning experience. He'd ask Garrett to hold a flashlight while he worked. Sometimes he gave him gloves. One time he handed him a hammer and asked him to finish it because the rabbit's legs were broken, and it was better that way. Garrett said he didn't do it, but he stood there for a long time, not knowing how to walk away. He never told anyone. I thought maybe I imagined it, he said. But then I found one of those lunch boxes under his bed. Years later, it had bones in it and hair. I buried it in the backyard. We didn't speak for a while. I looked back at the cabinet. None of the boxes looked new. Some had mildew around the edges, but they'd all been packed carefully, stored deliberately. Not like trash, like collections. We closed it and tied the latch again. Downstairs, we boxed up clothes and filled trash bags. Neither of us mentioned what we'd seen. And it was easier to focus on clearing out the kitchen drawers and checking expiration dates on soup cans. The next morning, we found something else in the garage, a wall of labeled jars behind the tool shelf. Each one had a piece of tape with a number. Inside were fragments, bones, feathers, dried skin. Some jars had more than one kind of animal in them. One was cracked and had started leaking. Garrett stood still for a long time, then walked out to the car. He didn't come back inside for over an hour. We didn't report anything. There was nothing technically illegal in the house. Just jars and boxes, no bodies, no videotapes, no photos. When we finished, we burned some of the smaller boxes in the fire pit behind the shed. The rest, we dropped at the dump. No one asked questions. I still think about the lunchbox with the undeveloped film. I threw it away with the others, but I made sure to keep the paper that had the dates on it. I don't know why. Maybe one day I'll check what happened on the circled one.